Yes. This is John from All Points TV, and today we're sitting down talking to Laurel Federsbush, the frequent viewers of All Points TV and formerly Fun Talk Radio, kind of familiar with Laurel. She's quite the activist, and she's quite, I would say, some people would say, kind of a political gadfly in some ways too. When you think, I think you can found both right and left. So. Anyway, today we're here to discuss her newest book, and she's got several out there. You want to check her name on Amazon. You're going to find, how many books now? 6, 7?
Something like that.
Yeah, so anyway, this is her newest one. This is just done this past month, right?
Yeah, the last few days, actually.
And something kind of close to your heart, or to maybe your intellectual life too as well. It's about abortion. It's called Yes, Let's Compromise on Abortion. And why don't we go into that? What does that title actually mean?
Well, I guess abortion is one of these wedge issues, or at least it's supposed to be. It's used that way, where supposedly people can't agree. You either believe this or you believe that. There's no middle ground. I've heard that and read that lots of times. And I'm just questioning that premise. I think that there are ways for people to compromise and find middle ground. And I think compromise is actually necessary, and I would like people to stop thinking of it as an issue where there's just no room for compromise.
Now, exactly what would you, the reason why I'm asking questions, because we haven't really got a chance to discuss the book, so I'm not trying to be, trying to seem like I'm in attack mode, because I definitely am intrigued by this. How would you say that you're willing to compromise on the issue of abortion?
There isn't going to be just like one compromise every issue or every state or every legal battle, or, would require different compromises. But I guess I think it's something that people should be willing to do. And a compromise by definition is that no one's going to be totally happy with it. It's going to have some things you want, but some things that you don't want, or maybe don't believe in or don't think is right. But you're going along with it because you're going to get some of what you want. If you don't compromise, if you're unwilling to compromise, you could end up getting none of what you want. You could end up with a law that's much worse than than the compromise version. And, you also just end up with two sides that are completely at odds with, each one calling the others, Nazis or, all kinds of horrible names, just all kinds of unhealthy discourse. And I think that we don't need that right now. It seems like our political system right now is polarized in too many ways. It's either this or it's that. And, I think actually on abortion, most people are in the middle, according to surveys. You'll hear say most Americans are pro-choice. They do believe in abortion, but they also are pro-life. They believe in some restrictions. So I think most Americans, if you go down and ask them a series of questions about it, I think you would actually have sort of a compromise position, something that's neither entirely pro-choice or pro-life, but somewhere in the middle. And I think that could be a place to start.
So there's some things I can see where I don't understand. And this, I'm been criticized for being sensitive, or I've never been in these shoes. And unfortunately, I never got a woman pregnant or a girl pregnant when I was a teenager. And some people say, you just never been in those shoes. You've never been in those circumstances. You can't judge people. But I just think that there's very few times I could say where I would allow for exceptions to saying, it's a human-generated problem. You took actions or didn't take the proper actions, and now somebody's pregnant. I don't like to go to the far and say, I never tell people not to have sex, and that's one thing the liberals always seem to throw in my face is like, you can't tell people not to have sex. I've never said not to have sex, but there's such a plethora of ways to avoid pregnancy. So I just think there's so much easily available. Condoms, worms, phones, jellies, IUDs, all those things. Those are on top of my head. It just begs the question of why weren't you using these if you knew one of these or saw a combination of these if you're sexually active? Unless you really are like you're really devil may care kind of attitude, sex causes babies. I mean, it causes them. I mean, that's the general way that 99.9% of us who are born were created through a sexual act. And some people say a pornographic act. So I'm not willing to let people off on that. Like, well, we were young, we didn't know what we were doing. I don't see how you could avoid not knowing. It's everywhere. The information's out there everywhere. So I really never bought into it. But when I see on the far right, they don't even want to. They want to, prohibit abortion, even on rape and incest. And I don't think incest is actually the biggest, real big numbers, but I mean, or significant numbers. But I'd feel really angry if I knew a family member of mine went through a rape and was forced to carry a child full term for the rapist. I don't understand how that would be justifiable. I don't see, and I just can't see the benefit of it. I can't see the purpose of that. To me, that's like making them victims over and over again. To have to force them into that position. So I mean, I'm kind of I don't like it, but I can see why a person who was raped, a woman who was raped, would want an abortion.
I guess. Well, I just want to take issue with that a little bit because one of my Facebook friends is Rebecca Kiesling, and she's a very big advocate for conceived in rape. There are a lot of people who were conceived in rape, but obviously their lives are as valuable as anyone else's, and to say that life is valuable from the moment of conception, unless you're the product of rape, well, either it's human or it's not human. So I want to take issue with that. But nonetheless, I think that's, if arriving at political compromises, that might be one of the things that, have to be in a compromise, that, abortion, except in the case of, abortion prohibited unless, rape or incest, and, or maybe late-term abortion prohibited except rape or incest. And, again, I'm not happy with those exceptions, but, that's one of the potential kinds of compromises that, it's not the only compromise. There are other, another potential compromise would be, abortion totally legal, except the clinic's very heavily regulated and would have to give all kinds of information to the patients and would have to show an ultrasound. So there are other kinds of potential compromises, but the rape and incest exception is one potential compromise, even though I don't agree with it. So.
See, I think that's one I could see where I would have opposition. Like I said, if I had a daughter or my wife or a girlfriend or whatever was raped by somebody else, I wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want to try to. I wouldn't know how to weigh in it. I mean, the other things men are hesitant to weigh into because for years they've been badgered to saying you don't have a right to weigh in on this at all, which I think is.
I totally disagree with that.
I totally disagree with that too because it does impact on society. I mean, upon the men of the women's lives or the men around them. It is a thorny issue. It's one of the more thornier issues. I mean, some people, if they were raped, some women who were raped would want to basically forget that maybe or try to move on, and that would be the quickest route is to have an abortion. But I don't know if that's, and I can't criticize that. I've never been in those circumstances, but it is a thorny issue because I can understand why that would be an option, a viable one for many people. So that's what the compromise you're talking about. You basically just like no hard fast rules. But I don't like what I think you already alluded to. In this country, it's polarized, and when one group wants to push something one way, then when other people get in power, they push it back to the other extreme position in the other direction.
Yeah, that's one of the points I was going to make. Right now, we're seeing kind of extreme laws or bills being put out on both sides. The most extreme pro-abortion laws, like abortion up through the 9th month, on demand, and in fact, people say it would be even like once the baby, if there's a baby that accidentally survives the abortion, like the born alive babies, that they're allowed to just leave the baby to die, and of course, so the pro-choice people say no, that's not true. But I've heard things. I've heard the law read so that it sounds to me like it is true. And if it isn't, then you're passing a law that's very close to it being true. That's so close to it being true that it's very easily to mistake it for that. And on the pro, the pro-life side, there are extreme laws like no abortion under almost any circumstances. I'm glad they have the exception for the life and health of the mother. I think most people would agree with that exception. But where I don't agree with some of the laws is that it would potentially, the woman would be prosecutable for seeking an abortion, and even they say that some miscarriages, a woman could be prosecuted for having a miscarriage, and of course the pro-life people say no, that's not true. But if it isn't true, I've read things that look to me like it is. So if that's not true, then you're passing a law that's so close to it being true that it can be very easily mistaken. So those are two extreme laws. And again, when I say extreme, I mean it's sort of like all one way or all the other way. It doesn't necessarily mean that extreme is always wrong, but it's not a compromise position. And, even if you might agree with one of those laws that I called extreme, that still doesn't necessarily mean it's a good law. There might be some laws that I would personally like to see passed because I agree with them, but it doesn't mean that they would actually make good legislation, because it might just be me ramming my personal beliefs down everyone else's neck. And if you pass an anti-abortion law that, like no one can get an abortion ever, it's not going to stop women from having abortions. Again, they're just going to have them in very unsafe conditions. So, ideally, if you're a pro-life person, what you would want to do is persuade women not to have abortions, so that, you're not just doing it all by force and legislation and, mandating what they do. You want people to do things of their own free will. And, so in that way, I think pro-life people have more, like even compromising. Like one of my ideas is that the pro-life people, should back away from, trying to legislate things, but should focus far more on persuasion. There's a lot you could do to persuade women, try to persuade women of your point of view. So that's one thing, but nonetheless, I think, there's some very extreme, like we certainly don't want to see the born alive babies being left to die. So, I think there has to be some legislation involved. On the pro-choice side, you don't want to pass laws that are so, so disrespectful of human life that you're horrifying everyone. And, that I don't think that passing laws that are repulsive to most people's sensibilities is really going to help you out either. So that's one way I think both sides are. Oh, and also I think each one feeds on the other. So if you're a pro-life person who passes, if the pro-life side passes some extreme anti-abortion law, I think it kind of motivates the pro-choice side to pass equally extreme pro-abortion laws, and vice versa. I think when each side passes a law that the other side considers very extreme, it'll sort of, it sort of has its own momentum towards creating more and more extreme laws that don't represent what most Americans, or I think most human beings, would think are good laws.
Well, I think I've seen lately too, and I don't know how far it's spread or anything, but I've seen like women that have been depicted showing that they're holding up signs. My first abortion was a wonderful thing, or that kind of callousness. I mean, I think is just alarming.
Yeah, I think so too.
And I know it's probably a reaction to saying, well, how dare you see, my life wouldn't have been to where I'm at now if I was forced to carry a child to full term and give birth and be a mother. So I mean. But the adoption option is always there, has always been there. Some people are critical of the way the system's administrated, and I think there's a lot of people on both pro and con side for abortion who would say that there's some issues with the adoption.
Yeah, that's one thing. I guess I think there are things that pro-choice and pro-life people could agree on, and it would be nice to see efforts for them to collaborate on those issues, like you said, adoption. I think everyone, thinks there should be, more adoption, or the adoption process should be made easier, or more sensible, or more respectful of people, or, there's a lot that could be done with adoption. And, some other issues where I thought that pro-choice and pro-life people could agree on the issue of like forced abortion in China, or forced family planning. And nowadays, those things aren't just in China. I've heard some other countries making efforts to have forced family planning, which could be either, forcing, I guess China would be more ruthless in terms of, physically forcing someone to have an abortion, but then there are other ways too of denying benefits for the additional children, or, just maybe denying career promotions, or just, ways that people would be punished for having either more than one child or more than two children. And, I think we need to fight those things because they could come here. People, maybe a lot of the people who believe that the planet is overpopulated, or, they might try to force those laws in this country. And it's not happening right now, as far as I know, but it could very easily happen. So I think that's, because if you're pro-choice, you're pro-choice. You don't think the government should be telling you how many kids to have. And if you're pro-life, obviously you don't want, forced abortions. So I think that it would be nice to see some group that was very deliberately made up of pro-choice and pro-life people. Oh, yeah, we were earlier talking about the, Israel, Palestine situation. You and I were talking a little bit about that. And there's a group called Zaytuna, and it's made up of people on the Palestinian side and the Israeli side, and they have certain rules about how they, conduct their discussions. But anyway, it's a deliberate effort to have some dialogue between two opposing sides. And, so something like that in the area of maybe like forced abortion, pro-choice and pro-life people making a very conscious effort to collaborate. And also services for women, like they could either be government services or charity services or some combination, but making sure that pregnant women and mothers have all of the help that they need. Because I don't think that women are going to make this decision for altruistic reasons. Like if you're pregnant, I don't think you're going to, reason through and say, gee, is this a human being inside me? Do I have a right to, I don't think you're going to go through any, philosophical discussion. You're going to be looking at your circumstances and making the decision that you think is best for you, or even be best for the potential child. Like a lot of women just don't think they can give the baby a good life, and that's why they have an abortion. And so, so I think that they have to, it would be good to make life the best choice for the mother and for the, for the baby if she gives birth. Just things to make it easier to be a mother, and also cutting down on stigmatizing. Like I think, there've been stigmas around being a pregnant unmarried woman, and I guess that's one area of hypocrisy. One of my Facebook friends mentioned that, and I'd also been thinking about that. That's some people, some of the same, some of the same mentality of, saying women shouldn't have babies out of wedlock, and shame on them, shame on them. Like a lot of the people who are of that mindset are also people who are against abortion, but they're actually contributing to abortion by promoting that mentality. So those are some ways that, so celebrating women who are pregnant, I think it would be a good move.
You brought that up, and a point I was going to bring up too, because a lot of times I hear the pro-life side, they love babies, and I mean, and the left is always says a lot. People on the left or people who are pro-choice will say, the Republicans or these Christians or whatever who advocate not to have abortions don't follow through. They don't. They also complain about social services and welfare, and they're going to be the let's face it, you're forcing these women to between a rock and a hard place. I mean, the abortion option is going to look more doable, more intelligent in those circumstances, because you're going to label them and you're going to resent giving them money. And there's a valid claim to that. There's a valid claim because, and it does seem that the men basically largely skirt being labeled or actually put on the microscope for their actions. I mean, it takes two to create a baby. Last time I read a biology book. So, I mean, it's like, and that's the reason why I have issues too with some of the extreme feminists say that men have no right to weigh in it whatsoever. I went, Okay, yeah, I think so. No, usually it's a man and a woman. It creates last time I know, I mean, unless they go through some bizarre procedure that I don't really want to know about, that's how it happens. And
Yeah, I'm
but
glad you keep bringing up things that I wanted to bring up. Yeah, and another reason why women shouldn't be making that argument that it's none of men's business unless you can have a baby, you shouldn't be, because women, I would think that feminists especially would want men to be involved in the women's, in the mother and child's life. I think they think that men do have a responsibility to their families. They would be the first ones to, like I guess Beto O'Rourke got into trouble saying something about that his wife was home raising the kids while he was out campaigning, and that's obviously not an acceptable position that for especially for feminist women these days. So but on the other hand, if you're going to criticize a man for saying that, then you can't turn around and say, oh, well, it's none of his business, he has no right to weigh in on childbirth kinds of issues, because either it's his business or it's not his business. You can't have it both ways. So.
that's exactly. I think that's what comes down to the issue of abortion, is that basically one side does want to be shut out, or is willing to allow themselves to be shut out, or doesn't think one side should have weigh in it whatsoever. And another thing is too, I think both sides have actually I could say this on the pro-choice side, they have a tendency to be dismissive. I think it's an inane argument when they say, the life development inside of a woman when she's pregnant isn't life. Yeah, I think all the other scientific theories I've heard point otherwise, but for the exception of this politicized issue, you have to reverse that. I just think that's kind of strange thinking. I think it's bizarre thinking. I just don't think it's consistent, and I don't think that it's moral. I think it's very hypocritical. I mean, I don't know what else that child developed, that infant, whatever they want to call it, fetus. Okay, they use the term fetus. I'm not saying generalities, but I'm not saying everybody who is pro-choice is going to use these terms. They might have issues with them as well. But I'm just saying I've heard it more in the pro-choice camp when they're trying to be dismissive, like it was the claim that it's a life. I don't know what it's not. I mean, if a woman who is pregnant is carrying a child and gets struck by a drunk driver or something like that, and she loses her life and the baby is also lost, they often charge the driver who was drunk driving or whatever with two counts of murder. So I mean, it's convenient. I just can't see how that's not a consistent follow through. If it's not a life, how can they prosecute for murder?
I guess that's another area where I see there being room for compromise, which no one else seems. I haven't heard people suggesting it. Like, I think it could be possible for the fetus to be considered somewhere in the middle, like somewhere like maybe not quite, a full person with regard to the law, and also just not like some inanimate object like medical waste that gets disposed of, or because a fetus isn't considered a person for any other reason, like the census, they don't count fetuses among the population, or welfare benefits. It's not, no one's demanding that the fetus be considered a person for any of those reasons. But on the other hand, as you said, it's alive and it's human. And I think it could be possible for the fetus to have, some compromised status. And again, maybe this would be, not to anyone's liking, but it would still be a compromise where it's, not quite a full human person with all the rights of a human person. But also, animals often have some degree of rights, like there are laws against cruelty to animals. And I think a fetus should have at least as much regard in the law as an animal. I think a fetus of any, should be, probably weighed higher than an animal on, with regards to laws and rights. So I think there's some way that it could be considered. There are laws against cruelty to animals, and I think some of the abortion procedures, even if you're not willing to say it's a full person, you could still say, but this procedure is too cruel and shouldn't be allowed. So I think there's room for that.
Well, you bring up a point, I don't know if you knew this or not, but in the United States and Britain, the people set up the Society's Prevention of Cruelty to Animals prior to the ones being created for children. As a matter of fact, the ones Society's Prevention of Cruelty to Children was set up after and on the same, using the Society to Prevention for Animals as a model.
Really?
In both countries.
Wow.
So I mean, basically, it's like it's like saying. So I mean, and I love animals. I do. I just lost a dog after almost 16 years.
Sorry.
So I mean, I definitely felt that. So I mean, but I just think it's ironic that they had them in place to protect animals before they had children protected. And if you dispute that, people, you can look it up. I did. I was alluding earlier that I was talking to you earlier about going through the I think. No, it wasn't. It was somebody else. I had gone through the social work tech program over at Mott Community College. So I mean, that was part of our training. We had to learn the history of the systems that we were, probably going into as social workers. So I mean, but yeah, so we always had those. We had animal prevention, cruelty prevention of animals before we did for human children. So I always thought that was kind of ironic and almost like, what were they thinking? It's like, but it's like, they have that joke too. They said. You're like 1800s. They discovered the athletic cup for men, and then like 20 years later, they discovered started requiring men to wear helmets during playing football. They figured out. I guess brains
priorities.
The priorities are kind of screwed up, but and it's factual too. I mean, I looked that one up. It was the athletic cup came around before the helmets requirements for playing football. So, and the original ones weren't all that good. But I'm just saying they seem it's like they put their priorities kind of screwed up. But I mean, they got there. But kind of a convoluted process, but and that's got a little height. This is a serious issue. I mean, it really is because I don't know more of a serious issue. I mean, the babies can't speak, and I'm not trying to sentimentalize. I mean, I've been accused of that by people who are pro-choice. Don't sentimentalize children. I have a hard time not to because I think of them as human. I mean,
and it seems like to me the people who are against sentimentalizing, whatever the word is, this issue, often are very quick to use emotional arguments in other issues like climate change. Look at this baby seal dying, or this polar bear. They're not against using emotional arguments on other issues, but somehow with this, oh no, we can't have any emotion whatsoever. It seems kind of. To me.
I think it's basically a position when the people are arguing a position. If they would fall through the logical, if you followed life on the way they have articulated what they want to run, they couldn't even make a defense of their own lives. A philosophical defense rather.
Right, yeah.
So I mean, it's like basically it's a suicide of thought. I think it was Chesterton said that, or it was Chesterton or Lewis, C.S. Lewis. Basically, the argument you're trying to make is being undone. The framework, the foundation is being undone by the other part of the argument you're making. So you're just basically taking the rock from underneath your feet, and the substantiality is diminished. So I mean, I think they're basically. I don't understand why they'd be so vehemently. I can't understand both sides. This is the extremes on both sides. Right. But I do think that to go a long way, I think the pro-life side would have to. I think one thing they would come around and actually do a great benefit for their cause is they actually were constructive and actually brought about reform and adoption laws, and also try to diminish, like you were saying, the stigmatization of women who are pregnant and not married or all that. Another thing is to also destigmatize those who are using the social system, welfare system, support system. So yeah. I mean, those three things there. If the pro-life side were to do that, a large portion of the almost the only way you can determine after that would be the pro-abortion side, not pro-choice, but almost pro-abortion side would be greatly diminished if those three things were or three or four things were actually pushed for by those pro-life side. So.
Right. Yeah, and I think it would just be good to encourage moderation because, like, if you're ultra pro-choice or even pro-abortion, I still think it's in your interest to want to cultivate the moderate, more moderate conservatives who might not be gung-ho pro-abortion, who generally lean pro-life, but might have some room for compromise, because otherwise you're leaving it to the most extreme. And likewise, even if you're the most extreme pro-lifer, I don't think you're going to want to pass the most extreme laws, because then you're going to send everyone in the ultra, pro-abortion direction. So, you just don't want to do some. I think it would be better for people to be willing to work towards the middle ground, or, I mean, there isn't any one middle ground, but towards positions where each person gets some of what they want. Where, and I think that the pro-choice side used to be more moderate. Like even Roe v. Wade, which pro-lifers tend to hate, is somewhat moderate because it recognizes that the fetus is different at different stages, and I think they, I'm not. It's kind of complicated, and I'm not going to, cite any specifics, but it recognizes, the possibility of passing different kinds of laws for different, law that abortion would be, that would be easier to pass laws against abortion at the earlier stages because in the later stages the fetus is potentially viable. They make viability of the fetus, grounds for its protection. But that's more moderate than what we have now, where they don't, some of these new bills, treat all phases of the pregnancy equally. They don't recognize that a 9-month-old fetus, should get any more protection than a few cells. And not that every pro-lifer has to agree with that, but it's still a more moderate position. So, I think if any, maybe pro-lifers should embrace Roe v. Wade more and say that some of these bills that are being passed now are not consistent with Roe versus Wade because they don't give the fetus any greater protection in the 9th month and earlier stages. So that's one way. And also pro-abortion people used to say more than they do now, I'm personally against abortion, but blah, blah, blah. Or they used to say abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. But nowadays you don't hear pro-abortion people say the rare, pro-choice people, I guess they would call themselves. But they often, I haven't heard people say that it should be rare. What they'll sometimes say is that, well, if women have more access to birth control, then it will be more rare. And there might be some truth to that. But then the pro-life people say, but, if it's more readily available, then people just have sex more and the birth control isn't reliable. And a lot of abortions are done on people who are using birth control. So, I'm not entirely sure what the truth is of the statistics. But, at least it would be nice if for abortion to be rare was something that at least both sides could agree on that.
See, I know you mentioned Roe v. Wade, and the one that's often cited for allowing what we call legal abortions in this country. I remember it was on a episode of Law and Order. Fred G. Thompson's character, he played the prosecutor there. He brought up a good point because he is a conservative in real life, but his character is also a conservative. Roe v. Wade was actually, he said that it was bad law, and I could see what he's talking about to some degree because this issue was kind of the idea of Roe v. Wade. It was settled in court. There was no public hearing on this or public discourse permitted. Basically, it was done by activists who pushed it, who got it become basically allowed to be legal in the court itself. Where it's kind of questionable if that should be in the venue. It should have been done in the first place.
Right.
Yeah.
And the woman who the case was supposedly based on, the Roe, the actual woman has become very pro-life. I don't know if everyone knows that. I didn't know that till I became pro-life. That she actually devoted her life to being pro-life. But maybe it isn't a good law. But I guess my point is that it's just a more moderate law than what they have now. At least it's in a more moderate direction than the pro-abortion laws being passed now. So even the pro-life people don't really actually might hate that ruling. It still might be something that would it's sort of more a middle position, and they could use it to fight off these more extreme pro-abortion laws that are being proposed and maybe enacted nowadays.
Yeah, you make an interesting point there too, because another thing is to follow up. I think too, the woman who this case, the plaintiff in this case or whatever, Roe v. Wade, she was basically, many people's view, she was used by the pro-choice side, and basically she wasn't really, from her educational background thing. And if you saw that and basically what she was, her life at that point, she was kind of a victim of circumstances and improperly used by these people,
right,
not fully aware of the consequences. Yeah. So, I mean, that's a moral and ethical consideration that's not, give often considered, by people who are on the pro-choice side. I mean, they're dismissive of it anyway. But I just think it was. See, I was like 9 or 10 years, about 10 years old when it became a case. The case was heard and stuff like that. So I mean, I wasn't aware of that to the point of, I was born and nobody around me, wanted to have abortion. So basically, it just slid past my consciousness. I've been hearing about it since I've been in junior high, and everybody had a side on that or took a side on that. And I could see both. I've always could see both sides, and I was admonished a lot of times because people I went to church with, because I wasn't so vehemently pro life, but I did see circumstances where I couldn't see myself forcing a woman to carry through with a pregnancy, and that itself was like angered many of the pro life people. But I mean, and I also said, and the ones I think the issues they got to address is they got to also be more willing to say, well, if we were going to have women having children, we can't be so scornful when they're using social services. I mean, that's a big thing right there. And a lot of them won't budge on that.
Right.
That's a big issue.
And also maybe for employers to be more make allowances for mothers, more time off, or maybe some child care within the company or things like that. Big corporations would probably be able to do that more easily than small businesses, but like to whatever degree the company can help a mother be in the workforce, that would be great. And yeah, I think you're talking about both sides of the issue. I think it's just always going to be a complicated issue because obviously it's the woman's body, and that's one thing. One way I fault some of the pro-lifers, they act as if they can solve this without the woman's consent, just sort of go over her head and just pass a law, and they compare it to slavery or the Holocaust or things like that. But you're not going to liberate all the fetuses. I mean, the fetus is inside a woman's body. That's sort of the definition of pregnancy. So you can't you just can't solve this problem without the woman being a willing participant. So if you pass a law that women don't like, that's just not going to work. But at the same time, I think that the pro-choice side, they want to act like this is just a choice, the same as chocolate or vanilla ice cream, or and that's not true, because it concerns a living being, or if you want to say it's a potential life, but whatever, even a potential life, I guess I heard the argument that there are cases where we value potential lives, you wouldn't want to pollute the environment for future generations, because those people, those potential lives or those future people are going to have to live in it. So, you're willing to consider future people in that situation. So why wouldn't you consider a future person or a potential life in this situation? It's not something that just treat as callously and cavalierly as, some of the pro-choice people would like to do. So.
It's gotten really bad too. I've seen many of these memes on Facebook, and I've also been to sites that I just find appalling. Getting women to celebrate having an abortion and discussing it. Oh, I enjoyed mine or what. Okay. It's like basically. I had a tonsillectomy when I was a kid. I didn't go around trying to recount that because I enjoyed that. And another thing is too, we got to bring about, because it is the claim on the pro-choice side. They said they want to make them legal and safe. They're still not entirely safe. There's a lot of women who still suffer and die from bad abortions, even though they have been legalized.
Yeah, Operation Rescue. I get some of their emails where they talk about all these, legal abortions where the woman either dies or has severe complications, and I guess that would be another kind of compromise, just as if more, the women were required to be warned about all of these things. Maybe. I assume that facilities are required to give women, some warnings, but there are a lot of potential health problems from abortions, and if just that were made more publicly known, that would be, a kind of compromise, just to make to put the information out there in a more public way, like the way we do with these prescription drugs being advertised on TV. So that, for every maybe Planned Parenthood sign, there would have to be a warning, this could, create this and that health problem, and, just things like that, and also grief. There's abortion. A lot of women have grief from their abortions. I heard on public radio, which public radio is pretty far left as far as I'm concerned, but they were interviewing some woman, and it wasn't the focus of the story, but she was mentioning that she had been pressured into having an abortion when she was young and how that had kind of devastated her life. And one of my friends who is pro-choice but has a grief counseling service, one of the categories is women who are grieving as a result of their abortion. And it didn't make her, turn against abortion, but nonetheless, that is something that happens to a lot of women, that they really regret it to the point of it, really kind of devastating their lives to some degree. And just if those things were more widely known, and that's another thing that it seems like pro-choice and pro-life people could agree on, just that women should be informed about all the potential. They should make an informed decision. If it's her choice, she should still make an informed choice. And you don't want to, and also you don't want to see cases where women are pressured into having abortions by their families or their boyfriends or their abusers. You want to cut down on there are cases where someone has incest with a young girl and takes her over and over again to an abortion clinic, and just things like that. Even if your position is that abortion should be fully legal, and you're not doing anything to make it illegal, just have be a compromise position to have more restrictions to make sure that women aren't being pressured into it. I think that would be something that both sides should be able to agree on.
Anyway, it's always interesting to talk to you, and like I said before, you confound both sides because you are all over the place on your political thoughts.
I'll take that as a compliment.
Well, the thing is, it's like the same thing with libertarians. If you stand up for something the left hates you, you stand up for this, you say the same thing is going to be divisive between both camps on the extremes, extremes in both camps, because you're libertarian, we often say, because a lot of times you're going to be accused of being a liberal by a conservative, and then on the same day you're accused of being a right-wing nut job by the left, those on the left. So
okay.
So basically because I think of it this way: the stock clock is twice a day, but there's still more percentage you got to go by. You're going to have another 50% where you're going to have to be guessing. So if you're right 50%, that's pretty good. By most standards, I would say that's good. Because if you're going in cold and you're just making decisions like we all do in life, you come in and the game's been already been in play. You don't know where you're going to be coming into in that spot, in this game. Use it as an allegory. You don't know where you're coming in at, what position you could be playing or what you've been disadvantaged or advantaged with. You basically work with the information you're given at that time. And a lot of times we make the wrong choices. I did when I was younger about the drugs. I was totally for prohibition and punishment. Then I started seeing the cost, just the sheer financial cost, and then the lives of people destroyed by being, incarcerated and then coming out and try to start a life, and made it nearly impossible. And I thought that, just especially for for marijuana, and I had to change my position because I just don't think the crime was that significant to require that strict, that draconian of measurements to punish these people. So, but we all have to come to positions based upon what we know at that point, and they might change. Mm-hmm. And I think you got to be. If you're hard fast, then you're not probably all that bright if you always stay with the same position you're in, because if you got more information given to you, a lot of times you got nothing else to do but to abandon that former position. That's why I look at it. So anyway, I was like, people can look for your book at Amazon, correct?
Correct.
And
it's on paperback and also on Kindle.
So that's really good. And what do you think? You got any plans? Are you going to give us a tip off maybe of what's going to got planned for another book, or you going to keep that a secret?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Whatever hits me.
So anyway, thank you again for coming in.
Thank you.
I'll post this. And hey, people, she's also a great harp player. So you got a wedding or event coming up, can contact her through her Facebook page, Laurel Federsbush there. Friend her. She's always liking friends, right? Okay. So anyway, thanks again, though, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.